Welcome back, Sebastian here, and today I'm going to be talking about Logan Sargeant and what he needs to do to secure his F1 seat in 2025. So on the board, I've got all of the driver pairings from 2017 up till 2024, where a rookie driver had the same teammate his first year and his second year, as I think it gives a really good look as to how these drivers progressed from the rookie season to their second season. In cases where drivers have changed teammates, though, because different teammates, are obviously quite different in terms of ability, usually, it can be very difficult to assess the progress the drivers made between their first season and their second season. So that's why I've limited it to only drivers who had the same teammate those first 2 years. And so, of course, we have Sargeant L1 down here at the bottom, but I'm going to go through the drivers first. So, first, 2017 and 2018, we have Stoffel Van Dorn. His teammate was, of course, Fernando Alonso. That first year together, Alonso won the teammate head-to-head 17-13. Second year, the gap got even worse, 50 to 12 in favor of Alonso. Looking at qualifying gap increased between the first 2 years. In the first year, it was 3.19 tenths of a second. Second year is 3.92 tenths of a second. So that qualifying gap between Van Dorn and Alonso increased. Points gap increased as well. In my race model, the gap between the two all increased as well. So negative 1.57, of course, reference point is Van Dorn here. And for the second year, negative 2.04. So about 25% increase there, or roughly. Now, in terms of expected points, so this is how many points they would have been expected to score based on their starting position and the strength of the car. For Van Dorn that first year, negative 4.59. For Alonso, negative 6.52. So there it's a bit closer. Of course, Alonso scoring more points, but that 2017 McLaren, very unreliable car. However, 2018, that second year, very, very different story. For Van Dorn, still in the negatives, negative 0.7, but for Alonso, positive 26.98. So he got almost twice as many points as he would have been expected to do. Of course, that's what happens when you're a driver of his caliber. So for Van Dorn, gap between himself and Alonso pretty conclusively increased across the board in pretty much every metric. And of course, he was dropped after that second year. So of course, the X with the circle are drivers who were dropped after that second season, but drivers with just the X were dropped, but at a later date. So after that second, so not after the second year, but after the third year in both of those cases. Next, moving on, also 2017-2018, Ocon and Perez. So of course, Ocon did lose his seat at the end of 2018. However, the reasons why he lost his seat were not really for performance reasons. He obviously lost the seat because Lawrence Stroll bought the team, and he of course wanted his son, Lance Stroll, to drive for the team. But first season, 87-100 in favor of Perez for the points. Second season, car's a bit worse, 62-49 in favor of Perez. So for both years in favor of Perez, but the gap is roughly the same in terms of points. In terms of qualifying, the first year 0.074 advantage for Perez, but that second year 0.115 advantage for Ocon. So Ocon actually turns over the qualifying deficit to Perez and out-qualifies him that second year. So that's definitely an improvement. In the race model, that first year, negative 0.46 for Ocon, but the second year is a positive 0.31. So the race model takes in other factors such as finishing position and overtake, and how many overtakes they have, like basically in terms of the difference between start position and finish position. So that's definitely a positive for Ocon. It definitely shows for that metric, it shows that Ocon did improve compared to his first year. When you look at expected points, 2017 negative 1.8 for Ocon, for Perez positive 5.84, but that second year negative 13.49 for Ocon, for Perez positive 11.53. So that gap in expected points actually increases between Ocon and Perez. Of course, you can have reliability there, you can have some luck. Being a little bit lucky can also influence that as well. But overall, I do think Ocon did improve quite a bit that second year compared to Perez. Maybe not as much as he would have hoped, but definitely still improved. And I do think it was a bit unjustified him losing his seat. Now we move on to 2019-2020, where we have Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz. First year, 2019, points head-to-head was 96 to 49 in favor of Sainz. Second year, still in favor of Sainz, but much, much closer, 105 to 97, so very close between the two. Qualifying, first year, Norris had the advantage by 0.3 of a second, but the second year, Sainz actually had the advantage by 3 thousandths of a second. So I do believe there were some outliers in those years. These are just numbers from the qualifying data. For the older data is numbers, stuff that I've just gotten off the internet. So there might be some outliers that should have been removed that weren't. But I do remember qualifying was very, very close between the two of them, their 2 years as teammates. But in terms of delta score for the race model, first year together, negative 0.9 for Norris, relative to Sainz. Second year gets closer, negative 0.65. So points get a lot closer. Qualifying is about the same, but race model score gets better as well. And when we look at expected points for Norris, that first year he got 33.78 less points than expected. For Sainz, positive 19.33, so fairly big gap there between the two drivers. But that second year, Norris goes from a negative 33 to a positive 1.65. Sainz also decreases slightly to 11.98. So definitely a big improvement there for Norris, comparing his first year to his second season. And of course, he was rewarded with that really solid improvement, really solid driving, with a long-term contract, and he's still at McLaren to this day. Then we move on, same set of years, 2019, 2020, and we have Antonio Giovinazzi, and his teammate those 2 years was Kimi Räikkönen. First year, a bit of a tough year for points-wise, 14 to 43 in favor of Räikkönen, but that second year tied 4-4, as the car was a lot worse. Qualifying also improved a lot for Giovinazzi. First year, 0.005, so 5 thousandths off of Räikkönen. Second year, 0.245 advantage, so 2.5 tenths of advantage over Räikkönen. But that being said, with Räikkönen's fairly advanced age in terms of in F1 terms, that's the gap that you kind of need to be pulling. In the race model, first year negative 2.04, and then the second year negative 0.46. In terms of expected points, negative 4.18 for 2019 for Giovinazzi. For Räikkönen, positive 13.96. So we definitely lost the head-to-head there. But the second year, positive 1.95 for Giovinazzi, and for Räikkönen, positive 1.26. So for Giovinazzi, expected points improved second year quite a bit. Race model improves quite a bit. Qualifying improves. Points improves as well. So across the board, Giovinazzi improved quite a bit first year to second year. Second year to third year, I think a lot less of an improvement. And I think at the end of the day, I think they decided that the ceiling wasn't really there, so they replaced him with Zhou, I believe. Yeah, I believe it was Zhou that took Giovinazzi's seat. And moving on to 2020, 2021, we have Latifi and Russell. So first year, the car was awful, 0-0 in the points. Second year, 7-16. So kind of hard to compare these two. If the car was better, I think if the car was as good as it was in 2021, I think Russell would have scored quite a few points. I don't know if Latifi would have scored any. But qualifying definitely improved. The first year, an absolutely atrocious 1.226 seconds off of Russell. Second year, it's much more respectable, 0.371, so about 4 tenths of a second there. In terms of the race model, it actually gets worse, but that is because that first year, no points. So that's one of the 3 metrics that I use, where you basically, I can't use it because of course 0-0, no points scored. But for that first year, negative 0.043, in terms of average finishing position, Latifi actually wasn't that bad his first year, but that second year, negative 0.176, because the points deficit was so large relative to how many points they scored total, the gap increased, but still a difficult one to compare. Same with the last statistic. In terms of average points scored above expected, they both scored 0 points. But for Latifi, because he consistently qualified much lower, he was only a little bit less below 0 than Russell. So for Latifi, 0.25. For Russell, negative 0.93. So I guess he in theory won that one, but not really. The second one, second year, 2021. Positive 4.78 for Latifi, positive 3.77 for Russell. So they beat him there. quite lucky, I think I felt Latifi was to get those points both in Hungary and also with the point that he got from qualifying in the Belgian Grand Prix. Russell also very lucky, I guess, to get those qualifying points from the Belgian race as well. So all in all, kind of really difficult pair to compare. But I do feel like in terms of both the race and qualifying, Latifi, just from memory and from watching, even though the stats kind of hard to tell, I do feel like Latifi did improve. But that being said, he was a paid driver. I think the circumstances were a bit different. If you didn't bring money to the team, I honestly don't think he would have gone the Williams seat. I don't think he would have gone a second year based on how poorly that first year was. Now moving to 2021-2022, we have Yuki Tsunoda paired with Pierre Gasly. First year, 110 to 32, massive deficit there in points. Second year, much smaller, 23 to 12 in favor of Gasly. Both years in favor of Gasly. Then we get to qualifying, 6 tenths of a second. That first year, the second year shrinks in half, 3 tenths of a second. So improvement in points, improvement in qualifying. In the race model as well, there's good improvement. Negative 3.66 deficit for Tsunoda, and then in the second year that shrinks to negative 1.09. In terms of points above expected, for Tsunoda, first year negative 26.83, for Gasly negative 1.37. So big advantage there for Gasly, but in the second year for Tsunoda that negative 26 drops to a negative 5.55. But the car getting a lot worse also contributes to that. For Gasly negative 2.59, kind of in the same realm as his first year. But I don't really blame Gasly for having a negative. The AlphaTauri strategy team was pretty awful those years, so I do feel like that poor strategy team definitely lost Gasly quite a few points those 2 years. But still, I think across the board you can see massive improvement from Tsunoda, and he was rewarded with a third year at AlphaTauri, and of course he's still there as of 2024. Now, 2022-2023, the last comparison that we have, Zhou and Bottas. First year, 6 to 49 is points head-to-head. Second year, it shrinks to 6 to 10, so Zhou scores the same amount of points. Maybe he'll score exactly 6 points again this year. But for Bottas, massive drop-off, but that's because the car got a lot worse. In terms of qualifying, this actually got worse for Zhou. So the first year, 0.211, but the second year, actually, that's a mistake there. That's not 2.2. That's not 2.8. That's okay. Well, we have the wrong marker. That's 0.288. Didn't increase that much, but yes, 0.288 for Bottas. So a little bit of improvement, I guess, for Bottas's favor. But so for Zhou, that's not really what you want to see. Ideally, you would want the qualifying gap to decrease, not increase between those 2 years. But still, nonetheless, in terms of the race model, the race pace goes from a negative 2.45 to a negative 0.27. So massive improvement there. In terms of expected points, also becomes much closer. The first year for Zhou, it was a negative 10.65. Second year, and then for Bottas, positive 9.34, so scored more points than expected. But that second year, 2023, for Zhou, only a negative 1.32. But for Bottas, a positive 0.17. So across the board, improvement for points, not an improvement for qualifying, but an improvement in the race model overall, and then an improvement in points above expected. So we see that, I think, for the drivers where basically this data either stayed the same, the comparison between year 1 to year 2, it basically stayed the same. Zhou, Tsunoda, Latifi's kind of hard to tell, but definitely Giovinazzi and Norris and Ocon, they all improved, with the Ocon being the only outlier, simply because he lost his seat because Stroll was coming in with money. Generally, it seems that if you can improve between your first year and your second year, you have a pretty good chance of surviving to year 3. We obviously saw with Van Dorn, lost his seat at the end of that second year because he actually went backwards relative to Alonso. And then for Giovinazzi and Latifi, between their second year and the third year, of course, for Latifi, he became teammates with Albon. Albon basically destroyed him that 2022, lost his seat then. Giovinazzi and Raikkonen, they had one more year together, 2021, and things basically plateaued. I don't recall Giovinazzi really being particularly dominant compared to Raikkonen, especially comparing Raikkonen's age and the fact that he had admitted to the media that he was basically just doing it as a hobby. So unfortunately let go for there as well. So I think it really paints a picture that for Logan Sargeant, back to the topic of this video, I know he's barely spent any time talking about it. For Logan Sargeant, he really needs to step it up, and he really needs to improve massively across all these different statistics if he wants to have a realistic chance of staying on the grid in 2025. So let's actually go over those statistics now. So for points, 1 to 27 in favor of Albon. Quite lucky to get the 1 point he did get at the US Grand Prix. Qualifying, a 0.584 gap, so over half a second. That's definitely something that needs to come down. Points model, negative 3.61, second worst on the board. Only slightly better than Tsunoda, Gasly in 2021. When you look at expected points for Sargeant, negative 6.05. So he was expected to score around 7 points, only got the 1. For Albon, positive 2.83. So if I had to kind of guess what he needs to be doing if he wants to keep his seat in 2025, I would say for points, it's hard to tell we don't really know where the Williams are going to settle at pace-wise, but I think in terms of points, if we say that Williams gets 10 points this year, I think that Sargeant needs to get at least 2 or 3 of them, if they get 10 points total. For qualifying gap, I think that needs to decrease to about below 0.3 of a second ideally. If not, I think it's going to be tough for him to keep his seat. For the race model, it's kind of hard because there's so many different factors that can be involved in calculating that. But I would say around 1, negative 1 would I think be acceptable for a second season. That's about what we got for Tsunoda, Gasly. But I think anything beyond that, I think he would probably lose his seat. So, for example, negative 1.5 would be about where Van Dorn and Alonso were that first year. So I do think that gap's a bit too big, but I think a negative 1 would be acceptable for Sargeant his second year. In terms of expected points, hard to say. There's so many different factors that can go into it, but I do think that overall, I do think that for Sargeant, he needs to be much closer to 0 in terms of like percentage-wise. Basically he needs to be, if you don't use the raw number and you use the percentage, he has to be much closer to 100% of the points that he's expected to score. And of course, that can vary depending on grid position and how many points he ends up scoring. So those are things to watch out for as the season progresses. I do think of all the drivers on the grid, he is probably under the most pressure in order to keep his seat for 2025. There's a bunch of other drivers in that discussion as well. And now that the season started with 2 races in, I think Ricciardo's had a poor start. And there's, Behrman had a great race at Saudi Arabia, so potentially the 2 Haas drivers are both under pressure to keep their seats for 2025. So, a lot of things going on, but I do think looking at, all these results, Sargeant really needs to step it up his second year. First 2 races haven't been super promising. I believe he's been out-qualified both races. Points still 0-0 as it stands, but still not super promising from Sargeant. So there you go. What do you think will happen to Logan Sargeant in 2025? Do you think he'll be dropped? Do you think he'll be kept on for a 3rd year? Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.